Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Donovan, for being with us today. Earlier, Alice in Wonderland was mentioned, a fairy tale. I'd like to bring up a fable, Aesop's fable, about the ant and the grasshopper. I think we're all familiar with that, or most of us should be. And the ant was very diligent in preparing for the winter, warned the grasshopper that he should as well, and the grasshopper was dismissive and undisciplined, and we know how that turned out. When winter came, he starved. The fiscal winter is upon us, Mr. Donovan, and if this budget is any indication, this administration is playing the role of the grasshopper. What you're trying to sell the American people on is the idea that the Obama budget, which in its best year still has a deficit of $463 billion, adds almost $1 trillion more to our debt, is deficit reduction. This might make sense to the administration, but it defies common sense. If you spend more than you take in each year, especially with a $19 trillion debt, can you honestly believe this is a responsible budget?
I believe if you look at the record, that what we have seen...
That's not the record. The question is, if you spend more than you take in, is that responsible budgeting?
This is a responsible budget. It keeps deficits below 3% of GDP, a widely recognized standard, and reduces our debt.
I mean, you mentioned that in this budget there are savings in Medicare and Medicaid that are generated through the Independent Payment Advisory Board. Aren't those savings that are really going to be on the backs of seniors who are denied services?
In fact, the so-called IPAB their recommendations only kick in if savings in our health care is not as much as we would expect. And most importantly, their recommendations can't deny service, and anything that they recommend comes to Congress for approval.
I just find it astonishing that there'd be so much emphasis on taxing job creators, the people who do create jobs. And I grew up dirt poor in a tiny little town in northwest Alabama, so I understand who the job creators are. I just find it astonishing that you want to punish the job creators, yet count savings against seniors who very likely will be denied access to services. Let me ask you this. In this budget, you impose a 14% tax on untaxed foreign income and a minimum of 19% on all future foreign income on U.S. business. At a time when some of our biggest companies, such as Burger King and AbbVie Pharmaceuticals and Medtronic and I think Horizon Pharma in Chicago, for instance, are moving their headquarters overseas, and countless others are looking at it because the U.S. is punishing tax code, what makes you think that adding more taxes on these companies for doing business internationally is going to keep them rooted here?
Well, actually, our business tax plan would lower the rate from 35% to 28%, and it has specific provisions that would stop companies from these so-called inversions and create incentives to bring money back home, bring jobs back home, and invest it here in the U.S.
It's still a long way off from making us competitive with other countries. Last thing I want to ask you about is you mentioned the savings generated through this administration's immigration policies. So let me ask you this. Given the likelihood that this Congress will not pass this administration's budget, how much of this does the President intend to do through executive order?
The President has already taken action within the power that the law grants him. He's made clear...
taken action beyond what the power of the law...
He's made clear that Congress should act to change the law in a way that would not only grow our economy, but also bring down our deficits.
He also says that he has a pen and a phone, and he's already used it in an unconstitutional manner. I'm just wondering if there's been any discussions in the White House about implementing some of these things in this irresponsible budget through executive order.
I think when the President took action last year, he made clear that he was acting within the authority granted him by law, and that there were additional steps that Congress needed to take that on a bipartisan basis, the Senate came together and agreed to, and that those steps would have powerful effects to grow our economy and reduce our deficits. And we ought to come together and take those steps.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from